7. And there's a number of actions that can happen that can impact an SLA. So in this section, we've been talking about SLAs an awful lot and what they do and what they don't do. And one of the big things to really understand is what is an uptime. So uptime is the amount of time that a service is available. That's the amount of time it can go and do work for you or process or whatever it is it's doing. And when you go to the Microsoft website, you're just going to see this absolute plethora of tabular data. But the big core here is that you're going to see varying uptimes from anywhere from 99.95 to 99.99%. And a lot of that is depending on the architecture and the system that you are working with. So a lot of this relies on you and how you built it and what Microsoft actually offers in terms of a service, depending on what your architecture is. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But there are distinct actions that both you or the service provider can take that will drive the ability to actually meet out on what the service level is and how that will impact what you're doing. So an SLA is pretty straightforward. This is one straight from the tabular data. So the SLA is we guarantee that each application gateway cloud service having 2 or more medium or larger instances or deployments capable of supporting auto scale or zone redundancy will be available at least 99.95% of the time. And, that sounds pretty good, but there's a way to read this and kind of understand how that works and the process. So we guarantee that each thing meeting these conditions that has failover setup will be available at least 99.95% of the time. So if you're using Application Gateway and you have an architecture that has 2 or more medium, larger VM instances running all the time, and you have set up auto scaling for your application or multi-zone for failover or disaster recovery, then as your only promises, your application will be available 99.95% of the time, or down per year 4.38 hours or about 22 minutes rounded up per month. It's like really super close to 22 minutes. And that's how you read it. And if you want or can't manage to have downtime of 22 minutes per month, then you're going to want to architect around that. And that's the big thing with these SLAs and your architect and your developers is understand that this is the guarantee, but this is what it means. And you have to meet certain criteria for them to actually meet this SLA. If you don't meet this very specific set of requirements, they're not going to give you any guarantees of service, right? Because this is how it works. So your architecture really matters here when you're working with your SLAs and you're working with the whole process along the way, right? So every line in the tabular data gives you a different standard for what they'll meet by a different system, right? So you're not going to be able to renegotiate this. Azure is just going to say, hey, this is take it or leave it. This is what it is. So you need to incorporate those SLA times into your operational process. And when you go through and do your service agreements and you do all the processes that you need to do for your company, you need to go back and make sure that, hey, is 22 minutes per month doable? Right? What happens if we're down for 22 minutes per month? What's the cost of that outage? And then do I really want to turn around and do something about that? So, if you're Amazon, 22 minutes is probably, a couple $100 million. If you're me, 22 minutes is like, nothing, right? But if it's 22 minutes on Udemy, if it's 22 minutes on Canvas, if it's 22 minutes for your company, what does that actually look like? Right. And then how do you architect around that? So generally, you're going to fail over to a different zone. You're going to do database promotion. You're going to do read replicas. You're just going to do all these things to minimize that thing down. You're going to have a much more scalable and a much more interesting architecture, understanding what those 22 minutes per month can actually cost you in terms of your company. So SLA times will vary a lot depending on what that configuration looks like. And again, back to your architecture. So just for one, right, we'll just pull one out of the hat here for the Azure database for Postgres SQL. So these are all in line. These are what they will guarantee. And notice that based on the configuration, they give you a different SLA guarantee depending on how you set it up. So that guarantee of 99.99% only happens, right, if you will have connectivity between their Microsoft database single server and our internet gateway. They're only guaranteeing connectivity from the database to the gateway for that. So there's one, right? We guarantee at least 99.95 of the time customers will have connectivity to their Microsoft Azure database if you're using hyperscale, Citrus, high availability nodes. So there you go. We guarantee at least 99.99% of the time customers will have connectivity to their Microsoft Azure database, flexible server configuration with zone redundant high availability, or flexible server configured without zone redundant high availability. So again, that's kind of where you need to pull this out and take a look at it. Depending on your architecture, these are the things that will impact your SLAs. So in summary, you know how to read an SLA, so you know how to manage downtime via architecture, right? And that's the big one here, is understand what your downtime costs you and how do you fix that via architecture? How do you fix that via disaster recovery, business continuity, whatever mechanism you need to inside your company to take a look at that. Know that your SLA times will definitely vary on the architecture that you choose, right? And that you don't need to memorize the whole set of tabular data. It is just a mess of data that you get. Just know that the SLA percentages vary from 99.95 to 99.99%, and it's going to totally depend on the service, the way it's architected, and what they're actually promising you. So when you go through and you do these audits or you do your process, just really read these things carefully and just be really aware in the real world, outside of the test, that your architecture can really influence what your SLA times are and what can impact that SLA along the way. So that's it for this lecture. I will see you in the next lecture.